Okay, so what I'm doing here is sort of working from a photograph and changing it into a painting. I think when you first get into digital art, like whether it's on Procreate or Photoshop or whatever, you think you kind of feel like it's just like stealing, like, oh, this is going to be so easy, etc. But there's always a valuable exercise here, right? In painting over a photograph. Because what'll happen to you is you think you just lay color right on top of it and it comes out perfect. But that's never the case, because as you zoom in and do these details, you start to slowly change the structure of the image. And then if you're not careful, you end up with something totally different than the photograph. Now, there's a lot of ways to resolve this. You can take the photograph and put it right next to the image and use it as an example and look at it. But I think one of the best things that you can do is to study the structure before you even start. So I just wanted to share this little structural thing that I was doing here, and I'll turn it off, even though this is kind of a ways down the road for this drawing. So let me make a new one, and then I'll sort of show you my process here. So basically, I take just a thin hard line here, which I made my own special brush, which has a little bit of flex and no opacity, and I made it small, right? Like pretty small, so I can just do a structural analysis. And once I'm happy with the structural analysis, I never ever deviate from it. I make sure that whatever I do, if I'm zooming in on these details here, whatever, that it stays within the structure that I first set for myself. And that way the image doesn't sort of like shift as I'm working on it, and you retain a likeness, because retaining the likeness of the person that you're trying to draw is all about keeping within those structural limits. Like, so, if this eye, this eye is this wide, if this eye gets wider, then it won't look like the figure anymore, right? The nose is this long. If that goes longer because you're working on it, won't look like it anymore. If the lips change their size, it won't look like it anymore either. But one of the most important things that you can do is train yourself to see three-dimensionally using a photograph, right? So we have this sort of concept of the face, and this is I'm not even using the photograph anymore. So this is well beyond the photograph, and it's now pure painting, right? So if you sort of think about the proportions of the face, you can sort of map that onto a square, right? I always do a circle, and then I always do the jaw, and that's in summary. And this circle kind of gives me the length of the nose, right? And eyes are always, I always treat the eyes as a unit of three, right? So there's one, there's another one, that's the same length, and there's another one. So no matter how the head rotates, the nose will get in the way of the other eye, but that little rule of distance doesn't really change, right? Okay, so now the problem is you can practice and practice and practice this, and then whenever you go to draw a figure, this is the only thing you know how to make this little mask. And so if you're not evaluating slight changes, if you're not evaluating it three-dimensionally, then you always end up with this little mask, and you end up flattening things out and not making it three-dimensional, right? So essentially, what you can do is learn to change that. If you can fit that little mask into a rectangle, then just add a little environment to it. Say like, okay, the eye line is below. Say like my eye line is below. Maybe this is a vanishing point kind of. but keep it loose, right? And then I'm seeing the side of the head and under the chin, right? So that is sort of like three-dimensional comprehension. And when you go into drawing the model, it'll help with your understanding so much. Then when you have that little mask shape, you say, oh, wait a minute, that has to be, projected back. I have to see the side of the head. And you can tell that it's too long, right? So I made my little drawing too long. So that has to be projected back. And then I'm looking up at the chin in this view. So even if I'm not really comfortable with it, that has to be projected down. And then the neck will be somewhere like not centered with the chin, right? Because of the eye line and the three-dimensional nature of this. So one of the things that you can do to practice is just keep, draw these little cubes and draw these little cubes or whatever framework you want to help you grasp that the head is three-dimensional, and then just sort of work through it in a sketchy way, right? You can also do it. I like to make a little sketch where my eyeline is always the same, right? And the head isn't really cubic either. That's a really good point. So what if what if there's your point of view, there's your vanishing points, etc. There's your vanishing radians. And then what if you base the head on a circle? That's kind of more natural, or a sphere, right? Then you could say that it's tilted away from us. And then you can make, maybe have a cubic thing here if you want to show that that's going to be the side. That's going to be the front. And all of that pretty much lines up with our vanishing point. I mean, not quite, but it doesn't matter because it's not an architectural drawing. Now, if we think of this as the front, then we can think of, maybe fix that line. This is a little more natural for me. Find the center and then sort of build that same mask shape that we've been working with, but know that we are, looking down on it. And even if we don't quite know, the nose is going to go to the side, the eye, once again, it's that unit of 3. I'll pick a different color. Right, so there's one eye. It's about that long. And we skip that same distance, right? And see how that makes it line up. And there's the other eye, and we can skew that and make it a little longer because it's closer towards us. But basically, see, it's really confusing on how to position the nose and the eyes. But if you think of that unit of 3, then you'll usually place the eye correctly and you'll place the nose correctly, but you won't know where to start that other eye. But that little unit measurement of that's one length, that's the space has to still be there, but the nose will get in the way. It'll sort of help you hold that together logically. And you can see everything is lined up on the diagonal, right? So the mouth, in my tendency, I want to do this, but it's not straight across, right? It has to line up with that, the shape that we're creating. So that's vaguely it. I wouldn't try to adapt this into, and this is the end of the drawing. That's finishing the drawing, like just, doing a little bit of a study and saying like, can I get my knowledge to be a little more three-dimensional in the abstract? Then yes, you can. All right, so now let's shift over and look at this derived from the photograph, right? Now this is really weird because her head is tilted. Let me get rid of all this stuff, and then I'll do a new layer. All right, so when we study this, the most important thing is where are we looking? Where's the eye line, right? Or in this case, where is the camera? So I feel like I'm looking down at the top of her shoulder, so it's got to be above that. And then I feel like, because this is a teenager, I feel like maybe she's a little shorter and the camera is maybe, and I'm seeing the top of her head, right? So if I'm looking her right in the eye, I wouldn't see very much of the top of her head. So I want to say the eye line is something like here. This is the level of the camera, right? Or the level of the viewer. Which is kind of interesting to assess because, I mean, even though this is just a beautiful original photograph, I think it would be nice to have lowered the camera down and look in the subject's eyes. But it's still beautifully composed, obviously, right? So now her head is skewed, right? So this is the central axis, and then we'll try to build that face structure. So, you can see the horizontal axis, the vertical axis, the horizontal axis. Once you settle on the horizontal axis is the same for every part of the face, right? And you'll fight that so much, like, because you train in proportions so much, so you'll train yourself, to draw the same structure horizontally. So a big challenge in this drawing is just seeing that it's tilted, right? Now, one of the clues here is I see a big massive hair on the right and not as much on the left. So it shows me that even though her hair is hiding her head, that we're seeing the side of her head, right, on one side. So it's tilted and skewed, and it's rotating in all these different ways, right? And then it's important for everything, like even the hairline. The hairline has to fall on that same horizontal axis, right? If we just draw naturally, we'll do that, right? And we'll make the hair kind of line up with that. And then all of a sudden it'll look mutated and we won't know why, right? So this structural work is the most important thing that you can do. Just keeping everything aligned. And now we can use kind of whatever, for this mask thing, as long as it's symmetrical. All right, so we have a sense of this mask. And keep it light when you're using squares, because the human head is not a square, right? Now, so when you look at the direction of her eyes, they're looking this way, right? So that, when I first was analyzing this, I thought that this would be three-dimensionally this way because I was thrown off by her eyes. But after I looked at this a little more, I realized that was completely wrong. Her head is tilted one way and her eyes are tilted in the opposite direction. This is really complex to understand. So it's like this mild head tilt, but it's something like that. Cool. Right, so once you have all that established, you have kind of like, okay, this is, I'm seeing the top of her head, I'm seeing the side of her head on this side, and I'm seeing there's a lot of hair over here, but I'm really seeing this side of her head. And my eye line is a little, maybe this is, and you can tell the shape of the box when it's wrong too, something like that. Cool. Right? So when you have that kind of guidance, then you can start on your drawing and progress it, right? And then just keep this as reference and keep looking at it, right? Or you can practice these little geometric versions of what you're about to draw. Like, so then you could do a circular one, and then, maybe with a couple little square lines here, get those tilts exactly right, and just get that in your head before you even start, right? And then that gives you a much greater reference point, so that you don't get involved in these details, like, go in and make the eye and keep working on it, make it too big, and then it's out of bounds, and then you erase it, and then you fix it, and guess what? When you do all of that sort of intuitive stuff, you end up with that same mask that you always draw, right? All right, now that really has a lot of meaning for the rest of the body as well. So I'll just briefly take a look at that. So seeing the top of the shoulders, but if this was a square, it wouldn't be too open, right? So just the top of the shoulders, and then you realize that the chest is going to hide the other arm, right? So you don't even need to show the other arm. Then the line of the chest, and then since we're looking down, remember we said the eye line is up here. Then if you construct the arm out of cylinders, you should be looking down on the cylinder, even if it's kind of mild, right? Cool. So we have a sense of the entire structure, and then we just limit ourselves and say, whatever we draw, it's got to follow this structure. And if we get carried away because, we're making this expressive, or we get too involved in details, then we have to pan out, go back to the structure, and make sure that it's exact. Now, if the structure is exact, you can sort of get carried away as much as you want. Like if you have the width of those lips, the length of that nose, and if you feel like, and if you lock that in somehow with a drawing like this, then you can be as expressive and crazy as you want, as long as you're strict with yourself about staying inside those lines, right? And this will help you in other drawing situations, like when you're drawing from other photos or when you are drawing from the model, because models move around a lot. So when a model is posed and you see that you are looking down on them, and that their head is tilted, and you get that structure exactly right before you even start, even if you study it on another piece of paper, then your drawing will be much more successful. It's not always about, there's this thing in drawing about just like, working hard and being a genius and having this insight that nobody else has. But I think if you have something that is really super well structured, and then you commit to the limits of the structure that you design, then the drawing doesn't really matter as much. Like, if the values are there, and you obey your own structure, then you'll come out with a likeness no matter what. All right, so that is it for this tip.